All right, welcome to part 2 of Professor Cooper's super awesome avoiding plagiarism and citing an APA style video. And yes, there's more. Now what we're going to do, having looked at in-text citations, is we are going to look at the references section and how APA style dictates that that section, which comes at the end of your work, how it looks and how you write those complete references. So, first one we're going to look at is for books. And what I've done here is I've kind of composed in pink kind of the general kind of outline for how a book will look when it is in APA style. This is the information you need. You need the author's last name, comma, their first initial and second initial and a period after each, if they even have a second initial. You need the year of publication in parentheses followed by a period. You need the title of the book in italics, and you need this part here after the first letter to not be capitalized. You also need the location and a colon and the publisher's name. Let me show you an example. So this is an example of your textbook. Here's the author's last name, comma, his first and second initials. Notice the parentheses in the year, followed by a period. This title is all in italics, and this part at the end tells you that it's the second edition. Notice this is not capitalized. This is after the colon. This is not, nor is this. It's a very strange thing that they do in APA style with titles, that they only capitalize the first part. Then Boston, comma, Massachusetts, and then this part here, colon, and then Pearson Education's the publisher, followed by a period. It's very detailed where the periods go, where the commas go, where everything goes, and APA style dictates all of that. Let's look at a printed journal, or what is called a periodical. For a class like this, you would usually be looking at scholarly journal articles. Again in pink, this time I'm using multiple authors and kind of showing you how that would look. Author's last name, first initial, second initial, notice the periods, here's a comma to separate out the second one, and so on. Then the year, the title of the article, and then the title of the periodical or journal. Notice here that the title of the periodical is the thing that is in italics. It's not the title of the article. So this is a little bit different. And when you look at these in a reference list at the end of someone's article, you can tell, is it a book, is it a journal, what is it, by how it looks. And that's why they're so specific, because it gives you a lot of information by how it looks. I give you an example here of what a journal article would look like. This is published in the journal Small Mammals by me, of course. This is a made-up one. Here's the volume number. Here are the page numbers. Notice here in a journal, you're not getting a P period for page number or anything like that you might expect, having seen that in the in-text stuff before. So it's a little bit different here. So journals found online. There's this thing called a DOI, which is a Digital Object Identifier. And scholarly journals now almost always have them. They're located up in the right-hand corner of a scholarly journal on the first page. And you use that number instead of a URL if you're getting an article online, if they have it. It's just a way of identifying things that are published and finding them in a kind of a consistent way. So here you see in blue, the DOI can be added at the end. You just put DOI and a colon. And here's an example of my DOI that I made up. Let me show you another example for if you just have a URL and not a DOI. What you can do is you just type in retrieve from and then here's the start of what would be the URL, and you just put the URL in, and then that's that. Here's an example. Retrieved from here. I'm also going to include a little section on web pages. What you would do if you're citing a web page is you would use the name of the author and the date like usual, and then in text, and then at the end in your reference list you would write the full reference and then add that similar part as you just saw, retrieve from, and then you type in the full URL. But a lot of just generic websites, there's no author, there's no date, there's no clear title to the work. So if you're going to want to use a website in your discussion board posting, then you should contact me and we can talk about how you can reference that appropriately. There are guidelines for every source type in the APA publication manual, and I'm giving you a little idea here. If you need to find how to cite some other sources for this class or for others using APA style, every library has the publication manual in their reference section. Our library at Ohlone has it. Other libraries will have it as well. You can flip through to chapter 7 in the publication manual. I give you some page numbers here in case there's specific things you need to look up. You can find them easily. The manual, unfortunately, in the edition it's been published in most recently with the blue cover, it's not actually that easy to use, unfortunately. So having some page numbers may be helpful to you. And you can see there's things like how do you cite a motion picture, how do you cite a video, how do you cite a TV episode, how do you cite a blog post. All of that and more is dictated by the APA in their publication manual. I'm going to throw in a little bit about citing secondary sources of information. This can often be extremely confusing for students. It's just really hard a lot of times. So I'm going to try to simplify it a little bit. To understand a secondary source, you need to understand a primary source. The primary source is the original document, the original publication. So if I do a study on the wild snipe and looking for them in the forest using a white pillowcase, I then publish this information. That is the primary source of that study. That's it. I'm the original source. Then if somebody else comes along and they read my article and they're working on a book, say, about snipes, they could then refer to my study in their writings. And that would be a secondary source. They are discussing my original source, but they're not the primary source. I put this picture over here because gossip's kind of that way. You know, you hear it from what we say is the horse's mouth. That's the original source. And then everything thereafter, you know, kind of loses its reliability perhaps. So when you go to secondary sources, you need to make it clear that you're not reading the original. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a textbook that I wrote. It's by Cooper. And in chapter 1, I discuss a study by Alport. And you want to talk about Alport's study in your writing. You thought that what he found was pretty cool, but you didn't find the primary original source. You can go and look up the article and find it and read it yourself. Maybe you didn't have time. Maybe the only way to get it was to pay for it online and you didn't want to pay for it. Whatever, you didn't read the original source. You only read about it in my textbook. So in text, what you do is you name the original source, which was Alport, and then you don't need to provide other information about it. So let me show you how it's going to look. Here's an example. Young children were found to be more advanced in their emotional development than previously thought, according to Alport. As, now see this, parentheses, as cited in Cooper, comma, 2012. Now this will become relevant to you when you cite your textbook, because a lot of the things your textbook is discussing, and part of the job of a textbook author is to summarize vast amounts of information. So if you're referencing your textbook author, make sure that if you're referencing him, it's something that he came up with, something that he thought of, something original to him. Or, be careful, he could be talking about something that he read about and he's summarizing it for you. And in that case, you would need to do this. You can always ask me for more information on this if you're confused. I'm really happy to help you with this. So in the reference list, in this case, you would just provide the Cooper reference because it's the one you read. You're saying, these are my references. So you're not going to put the Alpert reference except here because you didn't actually read it yourself. You read Cooper and what Cooper had to say about it. At the end of the paper, you have to have a reference page at the top of its own page. So what this means is, let's say you're writing a paper and you finish it halfway down the page, you skip to the next page and start a reference page. You write the word references at the top and you center it. You don't put it in bold, you don't put it in italics, you don't do anything fancy to it. It just says references and it's centered in the middle of the page. You alphabetize the reference list by last name. And the first line of any particular reference is flush with the margin and the others are indented. So let me show you how this looks in just a minute. You're going to single space individual references and you double space between them. So this is how it would look. So here's references centered in the middle. Here's your first one. And look here. This is indented underneath. This is called a hanging indent. And so you indent here, and then you put a space, and then here's the next reference, indented, put a space, and then you go to the next one. It just makes it look nice. It makes it easy to see the names, which is how they are alphabetized in the reference section. For work in this class that's not a paper, like discussion boards, you finish up your paragraphs that you're writing, you make a space, you write the word references, and below that you list the sources in APA style alphabetically. Oftentimes in a discussion board, you might have no references if it's all your stuff, or you might have just one. Major differences from a paper are, sometimes it couldn't, in the past when we used a system called Blackboard, it was a little hard to get things to center right. The system seems a little better in Canvas, so if you can center the word references, you should. You don't need to bother with hanging indentations in a discussion board posting for those references, not a problem. And you should be able to use italics where they're needed, like in the title of a book, for example. But occasionally this can be an issue. I know it was at times in Blackboard. It probably won't be in Canvas. Here's an example of a discussion board. This is kind of, just take a look at it holistically. Don't read the parts, but look here where my cursor is. Here's a quote mark. So here's the quotation. And, oh, this quote should be here actually. So the quote should end here. And then it would have Arnett and then the year and then page 9. And then down at the bottom, references is centered. And then here it is. And it's not, there's not a hanging indent because it's a discussion board post. So this is how they would look kind of holistically. You'd have something inside the bodies of the paragraphs where needed. You'd have references centered, and then you'd have your reference at the end. So how do you avoid plagiarism? Cite anything that's not your own work or your own idea or your own words. Use APA style to do this. You do it in text, using just that brief information, name and date, and you add quotations and page number if you quote. If you have trouble using your own words, leave it the same and quote it. In the reference page, name the section references and use the prescribed patterns for the complete references. Now you know what plagiarism is, what APA style is and why it's used, how to reference in the paragraphs you write using APA style, how to reference at the end of your work, and how to avoid plagiarism. You are awesome. I'll see you in class.